Imagine waking up, drinking just a single cup of regular tea, and then going to the bathroom 50 times before you can even think about going back to sleep.
I mean, 50 times.
It's completely nuts, right?
Yeah.
50 times. Your body is rejecting water so violently that your cellular systems are effectively just shutting down.
Yeah, they're collapsing.
Exactly. You're 32 years old, you are completely bedbound,
Right.
and in sheer desperation, you drag yourself to the doctor. You run every blood panel, every 24-hour urine collection, like every scan in the modern medical playbook.
Right. You do the whole routine.
And the doctor looks at this massive stack of papers, looks you dead in the eye, and says, I can't find anything wrong with you.
It is a terrifying scenario, but in the realm of chronic systemic illness, it is shockingly common.
Is it really?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
We tend to think of medicine as binary, like a broken bone is visible, a tumor is measurable.
Like you can point to it on an x-ray.
Exactly. But when a body begins to fail at a foundational biological level, standard diagnostics often have absolutely no idea what they're looking at.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping into a fascinating and honestly just mind-bending conversation today. We're looking at source material featuring two heavyweights in the health optimization space, Gary Brecka and Tim Gray.
Two very interesting guys.
Very. And the mission here is to deconstruct Tim Gray's incredible personal journey. We were talking about the guy who actually lived that 50 times a day nightmare and went from being bedbound to becoming one of the most prominent health optimization experts in the world.
It's quite the turnaround.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this because we aren't just here to marvel at his biography. The goal is to pull the actionable foundational mechanics out of his story that, anyone listening right now can actually use. Because biohacking or optimization, it sounds intimidating.
It sounds like something reserved for tech billionaires.
Right. Trying to live forever in a hyperbaric chamber or whatever.
Right.
But the reality this source reveals is vastly different. It's really about mastering the absolute basics.
It really is. What's fascinating here is that the core thread running through this entire discussion is the profound connection between our modern environmental deficits and chronic disease. We are looking at a human body that simply does not have the raw materials it needs to run its basic operating system. Traditional medicine is looking for a recognizable pathology, a disease. But what we are really exploring today is how cascading compounded deficiencies can entirely mimic disease.
I always think of this like the dashboard of a car.
Okay, I like that.
If you're driving to work and the check engine light starts flashing, you pull over, take it to a mechanic. They plug their specialized diagnostic computer into the dashboard port.
Right, they look for the code.
Yeah, but if their specific software doesn't have a code for, say, the wire connecting the battery to the alternator has been chewed by a rat, the computer just reads as normal.
Yeah.
So the mechanic essentially puts a piece of black electrical tape over your flashing check engine light, charges you a copay, and sends you back onto the highway while the engine literally starts smoking. That is essentially what the doctors were doing to Tim.
That analogy perfectly captures the limitations of specialized medicine when dealing with a systemic collapse. The doctors were focused on the tape.
Just hiding the light.
Exactly. But Tim realized he had to open the hood and trace every single wire himself.
So let's trace how those wires got chewed in the first place, because the inciting incident of this whole saga is that classic work hard, play hard lifestyle. Tim describes his former self as this Homer Simpson archetype.
But disguised in a tailored three-piece suit.
Yes. Running a marketing agency in London. He was the absolute picture of conventional modern success.
But it was a success built on a foundation of biological bankruptcy.
Oh, completely. His schedule alone makes my cortisol spike just reading it. He would wake up around 8:30 in the morning completely exhausted. He'd immediately rely on 2 cups of coffee just to pry his eyes open, battle his way through gridlocked London traffic, and sit in an office under fluorescent lights all day.
Classic corporate grind.
Then he'd work straight through until 6:30, drive to a secondary office, work until 8, and finally collapse through his front door at 9:30 at night.
And I'm guessing his diet wasn't exactly optimized either.
Not at all. He'd eat whatever ultra-processed junk was fastest, pass out, and do it all over again. And the wildest part is his stress management strategy. He legitimately treated binge drinking on Saturday nights as his version of meditation.
Oh.
Yeah, that was the psychological release valve. Then he'd spend all of Sunday hungover, lying in bed, actively convincing himself that the Sunday bed rest was repairing the weekend's damage.
We normalize dysfunction so easily. When every single colleague and friend around you is running on the exact same hamster wheel, burning the candle at both ends, relying on caffeine and sugar to push through the afternoon slump.
And using alcohol to come down.
Right, using it to force a parasympathetic wind down on the weekends. It doesn't register as self-destruction. It just feels like participation in modern society.
That's just what adults do, right?
Exactly. And the human body is remarkably resilient. It will compensate for that abuse for years until it runs out of compensatory mechanisms.
And his breaking point was seemingly innocuous. He had a trip planned to Bali and had to get a few standard routine travel vaccinations.
Just normal preventative stuff.
Yeah, but he suspects those shots were just the tiny little straw that finally broke the camel's back, because the moment his return flight landed back in London, the system failure initiated.
How did it start?
He felt this insane cutting pain in his side. It turned out to be severe kidney stones brought on by years of chronic systemic dehydration. But the dominoes just kept falling from there.
The cascading effect.
Exactly. Urinary tract infections, prostate infections, severe bloating, debilitating brain fog, adrenal fatigue, and that horrifying symptom we mentioned, peeing 30 to 50 times a day. Water would go in, and his body would instantly expel it.
The inability to retain hydration is a massive red flag. It tells you that the cellular structure itself is fundamentally compromised.
Which brings us to the Post-it notes. After the doctors basically shrugged and told him they couldn't find a recognized pathology, Tim had his give up or go all-in moment.
That's a powerful crossroads.
He went to the store, bought a massive pack of Post-it notes, and cleared a wall in his house. He wrote down every single symptom he had: the urination, the brain fog, the digestive pain, the kidney stones, the depression. He stuck them all on the wall and started mapping the branches back to a root trunk.
You know, his approach was a masterclass in systems biology, even if he didn't have the medical degree to call it that yet. He started connecting the biochemical dots, which led him to a rather terrifying root cause.
Heavy metal toxicity, right?
Yes, specifically severe mercury buildup. And this is where we have to look at the genetic component detailed in the source material. Tim discovered through genetic testing that he possessed specific mutations, commonly referred to as the MTHFR and MTRR SNPs.
Okay, hold on, let's pause right there.
Sure.
Because I hear MTHFR SNP, and my brain immediately assumes we need a whiteboard and a genetics textbook.
It sounds intimidating.
It does. Explain this to me like I have absolutely no background in biology. What does that gene actually do?
Okay, think of your body as a massive, bustling city.
All right, I'm with you.
Every city generates trash, metabolic waste, environmental toxins, heavy metals from the food and water. The MTHFR gene provides the instructions for building the city's garbage trucks.
Ah, okay.
It governs a biochemical process called methylation. Methylation is essentially the cellular mechanism for taking out the trash. If you have a fully functioning MTHFR gene, your garbage trucks are highly efficient. They pick up the mercury and the toxins and drive them out of your system through your liver and kidneys.
But Tim has the mutations.
Exactly. If you have the mutations Tim has, your garbage trucks are essentially broken down. They might be operating at 30 or 40% capacity.
So the city is still generating the exact same amount of trash, but there's nobody there to pick it up.
That's exactly it. The mercury from his environment, which he later traced back to things like his silver amalgam dental fillings, wasn't leaving his body, it was bioaccumulating.
We hear the phrase heavy metal toxicity thrown around, but it feels abstract. Like, what does mercury actually do to human tissue?
Well, the historical context is fascinating here. Think of the phrase mad as a hatter.
Like from Alice in Wonderland.
Exactly. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, hat makers used a solution of mercury nitrate to process animal pelts into felt. Over years of inhaling those invisible mercury vapors in poorly ventilated workshops, the hatters developed severe, irreversible neurological damage.
Oh, wow. I never knew that was the origin.
Yeah, they suffered from intense tremors, severe mood swings, paranoia, and crippling anxiety. That is where the phrase comes from. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin.
That's terrifying.
It is. But at the cellular level, the physical damage is even more insidious. Mercury physically binds to and alters the lipid bilayer, the membrane of your cells.
Okay, what does that look like?
If you look at a healthy cell under an electron microscope, the membrane is smooth, pliable, and selectively permeable. It lets the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. But if you look at a mercury-toxic cell, the membrane is structurally destroyed. The visual Tim uses is that it looks like jagged barbed wire.
Barbed wire.
Yeah.
That is a horrifying visual for something floating around inside your own organs.
It paints a very accurate picture of the mechanical problem, though. When your cell membranes turn into barbed wire, two things happen. First, the intracellular toxins are trapped inside. But much more critically for Tim, the essential extracellular nutrients cannot get in.
So they're locked out.
Completely. The physical structure of the mercury molecule competes with and completely blocks crucial minerals like magnesium from passing through the cell wall.
Wait, really? So you could be eating a perfect diet?
The most pristine, organic, nutrient-dense diet on the planet. But if your cell membranes look like barbed wire, those nutrients are just bouncing off. You are quite literally starving at a cellular level while having a full stomach.
So if the cells are wrapped in barbed wire and nothing can get in, where on earth do you even begin the repair process? Because if he takes a supplement, it's just going to bounce off. Right?
Exactly.
The source material shows he had to start one step back. He had to look at the system responsible for absorbing the nutrients out of the food in the first place. He had to look at the plumbing, the gut.
It is the only logical starting point. If the digestive tract isn't extracting and assimilating, any downstream interventions are completely useless.
And his gut was an absolute war zone. Before the kidney stones, when he was battling all those initial unexplained infections, his doctors had prescribed him 3 continuous months of broad-spectrum antibiotics.
3 months is a massive dose.
And those antibiotics acted like a nuclear bomb detonating in his microbiome. They didn't just kill the bad bacteria causing the infections, they completely scorched the earth, wiping out the billions of beneficial bacteria required to digest food and absorb water.
Which perfectly explains the most alarming symptom.
Yeah.
The reason he was urinating 50 times a day wasn't just a bladder issue. It was a severe systemic mineral deficiency caused by that malabsorption.
Because water needs minerals to stay in the body, right?
That's right. Water cannot just stay in the body on its own. It requires minerals, specifically electrolytes, to bind to the cellular structure.
So the water was just flushing straight through the pipe because there was no sponge left to hold it.
That is the mechanical reality. And his methodology for fixing this was pure trial and error. He realized the frequent urination was tied to this mineral depletion, so he systematically began testing individual minerals, isolating them one by one to see if anything would give the water something to adhere to.
And the breakthrough for him was potassium. He introduced high-dose potassium into his system, and the turnaround was staggering. Within 48 hours, he went from going to the bathroom 50 times a day down to a completely normal 5 times a day.
Incredible.
He actually went back and told his doctor this, and the doctor told him that result was impossible.
Of course they did.
Right, but it wasn't a miracle cure. It was just basic chemistry. The mercury had blocked the minerals, the antibiotics destroyed the absorption, and by finally flooding the digestive tract with the exact mineral required for osmotic balance, the plumbing finally started to hold pressure.
Stopping the massive fluid loss was crucial, but it was just plugging a hole in a sinking ship. He still had a completely destroyed intestinal lining that needed rebuilding. The mucosal layer of his gut was gone.
And the lengths he went to for this next phase are wild.
Yeah.
We have to talk about digestive enzymes, because the source shares an anecdote that is both slightly gross and incredibly illuminating.
The platinum coil story.
Yes. So Tim had undergone a separate surgery to address a vein issue. And during that procedure, the surgeons removed a 30-meter platinum metal coil that had been placed inside him during a previous medical intervention.
Right.
The doctors handed this removed coil back to him in a sealed test tube as this bizarre souvenir. And attached to this metal coil was still a significant amount of his own organic human vein tissue.
It is a morbid keepsake, I'll give you that. But for someone applying systems thinking to their own biology, it became the perfect desktop laboratory.
Exactly. He had been reading heavily about the power of proteolytic enzymes, these specialized enzymes designed to aggressively break down proteins. He wanted to see if the hype was real.
But what did he do?
He cracked open a few capsules of these high-powered enzymes, dumped the powder into the test tube with the metal coil and his own human tissue, added a little water, and left it on his counter overnight.
And the results.
When he woke up the next morning and checked the tube, the organic vein tissue was entirely gone. The enzymes had completely digested and dissolved it. Only the bare, shiny platinum metal was left sitting at the bottom of the tube.
Wow. It's undeniable proof of how aggressively these compounds dismantle biological matter.
So he turned that weapon inward. He started taking hundreds of these enzyme capsules a day. Crucially, he took them on an empty stomach. The logic was that if there was no food in his stomach to digest, The enzymes would pass directly into his systemic bloodstream and start aggressively breaking down free-floating proteins, lingering viruses, and pathogenic bacteria.
It is an extreme protocol, often referred to as systemic enzyme therapy. But, it raises a much larger foundational question about our modern environment.
What's that?
Why was his digestive system, and why are the digestive systems of millions of people today so depleted of enzymes that they require this kind of aggressive supplementation just to process a normal meal?
Here's where it gets really interesting. I've been thinking about this evolutionary mismatch. If you look back at how humans ate for thousands of years, consuming food was an incredibly long, sensory-rich process.
Right, it wasn't instantaneous.
Exactly. If you were going to eat meat, you had to track the animal, hunt it, harvest it, build a fire, and slow cook it. If you were eating plants, you were foraging, cleaning, and preparing them.
There was a massive buildup.
Yes. For hours before the food ever touched your tongue, your brain was registering the smells. You were visually anticipating the meal. You were salivating. Those sensory cues are the trigger for the brain to tell the pancreas in the stomach, hey, a specific type of protein and fat is coming in an hour. Start manufacturing the exact enzymes needed to break it down.
The biological preparation phase.
Right. But contrast that with a Tuesday afternoon in a modern office. You are staring intensely at a glowing screen, your nervous system is agitated from emails, and a delivery driver hands you a perfectly uniform, ultra-processed sandwich wrapped in paper.
You're completely distracted.
You unwrap it and swallow it in 4 bites, while never taking your eyes off the spreadsheet. There is zero sensory buildup. Your brain never sends the signal. That food hits your stomach like a surprise attack.
Caught completely off guard.
Your stomach essentially panics. It has no enzymes ready. So the food just sits there in the dark at 98 degrees. It ferments, it putrefies, it causes massive bloating, and it creates systemic inflammation because the body has to frantically scramble to produce the digestive juices after the fact.
And that fermentation process severely damages the intestinal lining. Tim recognized this, so alongside the systemic enzymes, he started using Swedish bitters and ox bile with his meals.
Ox bile?
Yeah, the source describes it beautifully. It acts like heavy-duty dish soap for the gut.
Oh, I like that visual.
It emulsifies the dietary fats and significantly speeds up gastric emptying, ensuring the food moves through the tract before it has a chance to sit and rot. But fixing the digestion is only half the battle of a damaged gut. He also had to address the structural integrity of the intestinal wall itself, a condition widely known as leaky gut.
This is where the tight junctions come in, right?
Exactly.
From my understanding, your intestinal wall is only one single cell thick, and those cells are held together by these tight junctions, almost like biological shoelaces. But chronic inflammation causes those shoelaces to untie.
That is exactly right. And when those junctions pull apart, yes. And vitamin D is an absolute prerequisite for maintaining the structural integrity of those tight junctions.
And as he sealed those leaks, as he rebuilt the plumbing and repopulated the good bacteria, something else happened that I find to be the most profound part of his entire recovery.
The psychological shift.
Yes. His crippling anxiety and severe depression began to lift. Historically, the medical system has treated psychiatry and gastroenterology as 2 completely isolated disciplines. If your brain hurts, you see a therapist. If your stomach hurts, you see a GI doctor.
But biological reality does not respect those artificial departmental boundaries.
Not at all.
The gut and the brain are intimately mechanically linked, primarily through the vagus nerve and the production of neurotransmitters. We can trace the exact biochemical pathway of his anxiety. It all comes down to serotonin, which is our primary mood-stabilizing, happiness-regulating neurotransmitter.
Right.
The common assumption is that serotonin is exclusively a brain chemical, but upward of 90% of the body's serotonin is actually manufactured in the digestive tract.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that. How does a piece of food turn into a feeling of happiness?
It starts with dietary protein. When you eat protein, your body breaks it down into individual amino acids, one of which is tryptophan. Now, tryptophan cannot just magically turn into serotonin. It requires a conversion process.
Okay.
And this is the critical step. Specific strains of beneficial gut bacteria are responsible for taking that tryptophan and converting it into an intermediate compound called 5-HTP. Only then can that 5-HTP cross the blood-brain barrier and be synthesized into serotonin.
So if we look at Tim's timeline, he took 3 continuous months of antibiotics. He carpet-bombed his entire microbiome.
He eradicated the specific bacterial strains required to make that first crucial conversion. It didn't matter how much protein he ate or how many hours he spent in therapy. His body physically lacked the biological machinery to manufacture the raw building blocks of serotonin.
If there is no serotonin, there is no joy. There is only anxiety and depression. It totally reframes mental health. It's not a weakness of character. It's a mechanical failure of the gut plumbing.
And this mechanical failure completely explains the limitations of our most common psychiatric medications.
You mean like antidepressants?
Yes. The source material references a fascinating conversation with a Harvard-trained psychiatrist who was dealing with patients suffering from severe drug-resistant mental illnesses. We are talking about debilitating schizophrenia, severe paranoid delusions, and crippling obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Oh.
These patients were on high doses of traditional SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they were experiencing zero relief.
Because an SSRI doesn't make serotonin. I've heard it explained like a fountain.
Oh, that's a good analogy. Go ahead.
If serotonin is the water, an SSRI just plugs the drain so the water recirculates in the fountain longer before draining away. But if Tim's gut bacteria are dead, and he's not manufacturing any serotonin in the first place...
The fountain is completely dry.
Exactly. The fountain's completely dry. The SSRI is just plugging a dry drain. It has nothing to work with.
That is a brilliant analogy. A dry fountain. This Harvard psychiatrist recognized that exact problem. He looked at his severely schizophrenic patients and noticed a massive correlation. Almost all of them were suffering from profound metabolic syndrome, obesity, or severe gut dysfunction.
So the gut was the common denominator.
Yes. So he abandoned the traditional psychiatric drugs and started treating their mental illness with dietary interventions. He focused entirely on rebuilding the gut microbiome and supporting the mitochondria, which are the energy powerhouses inside our cells.
And what was his theory there?
His hypothesis was that these severe psychiatric symptoms were actually just neurological manifestations of deep, systemic, mitochondrial energy deficits originating in the gut.
Right. If the brain doesn't have the energy to run its operating system, it just starts glitching.
Mm.
And the results of this diet-first approach.
When he repaired the gut and restored mitochondrial function, the psychiatric illnesses began to recede.
Wait, really?
Yes. The paranoid delusions faded. The schizophrenia became manageable. The mental illness vanished when the biological root cause was addressed. Now, the pushback this doctor received from the traditional psychiatric community was ferocious.
I can imagine.
They openly mocked him. They accused him of claiming he could cure complex schizophrenia with an avocado. But the clinical data was undeniable. If severe mental illness is this deeply tethered to gut inflammation and cellular energy, the implications are staggering. We have to ask, how many millions of people are suffering from psychological distress, undergoing years of traditional therapy, when their actual problem is a biological energy deficit?
It makes you look at every single health headline differently. But for Tim Gray, fixing the plumbing and getting the nutrients flowing again was just phase one. The car's engine could finally hold oil, but it still needed the most critical fuel source in the universe to actually initiate deep tissue repair.
It needed oxygen.
Which brings us to an intervention he discovered around 2015, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, or HBOT.
HBOT is a profoundly powerful tool, though largely misunderstood by the general public.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear hyperbaric chamber, my mind immediately goes to deep-sea divers suffering from the bends. Or those weird tabloid photos of Michael Jackson sleeping in a glass tube in the 80s.
Right, it sounds very eccentric.
It sounds like extreme, inaccessible medicine. But Tim, in his quest to leave no stone unturned, booked a session at a clinic in London. And there was a very specific, seemingly minor moment after that first session that entirely convinced him the therapy was real.
What was it?
He got on the train for the 2-hour commute back home, and he fell asleep.
That's it.
That's it. He slept so deeply, in fact, that he missed his train stop. Now, if you're listening on your commute right now, falling asleep on a train might just sound like you had a long day at the office.
Yeah.
But for Tim, this was revolutionary.
Oh, because of the adrenal fatigue?
Exactly. He noted that for years, his body had been chronically wired and tired. He was suffering from such severe adrenal fatigue and systemic panic that daytime sleep was a physical impossibility. Falling asleep on a public train meant that, for the first time in a decade, his nervous system felt safe enough to power down.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that feeling of sudden, profound safety is not psychological. It is a direct, measurable, physiological response to the mechanics of HBOT.
Okay, break that down for us.
To understand why it works, we have to look at how we normally breathe. The ambient air in the room right now is roughly 21% oxygen. When you take a breath, your red blood cells act as transport vehicles, picking up that oxygen and carrying it through the circulatory system. But those red blood cells have a maximum carrying capacity.
I picture it like a piece of luggage. You can only stuff so many shirts into the suitcase before the zipper breaks. Your red blood cells are the suitcase, and they max out at that 21%.
Precisely. But a hyperbaric chamber fundamentally alters the physics of the environment. Inside the chamber, you are breathing 95 to 99% pure oxygen. More importantly, you are breathing it under increased atmospheric pressure.
And what does the pressure do?
This pressure bypasses the red blood cell suitcase entirely. The pressure literally forces the oxygen gas to dissolve directly into the liquid portion of your blood, the blood plasma.
So it's like sitting on the suitcase to force the zipper shut, but instead of shirts, you are force-feeding life-giving oxygen into the deepest, most restricted fluids of your body.
It allows you to dissolve up to 15 times more oxygen into the system. This is critical because chronic illness, heavy metal toxicity, and deep inflammation all restrict normal blood flow. The red blood cells simply cannot reach the damaged tissue, but the oxygenated plasma can seep into those restricted areas.
Do we see this used in conventional medicine?
Yes. The source material provides a stunning clinical example of this mechanism: diabetic wound healing. Patients with severe advanced diabetes often suffer from peripheral neuropathy and terrible circulation in their extremities. They develop severe foot ulcers that simply refuse to heal because no oxygenated blood can reach the tissue.
Which usually leads to amputations, right?
Historically, yes. But when these diabetic patients undergo a protocol of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, the pressurized oxygen saturates the plasma, bypasses the compromised circulatory blockages, and bathes the necrotic tissue in oxygen. The wounds literally begin to heal and close from the inside out. It saves limbs.
It's an incredible technology. And for Tim, whose cells have been suffocating under the weight of mercury toxicity, poor desk posture, and chronic shallow mouth breathing, this massive pressurized influx of oxygen was the ultimate biological shortcut.
He really leaned into it.
He went all in. He started doing 60 to 90-minute sessions in the chamber every single day. He even built his own wellness clinic in London so other people could access the technology. But here is the paradox in the source material that I found absolutely fascinating.
The drop-off clients.
Yeah, he had all these clients commuting into central London for these HBOT sessions, and they were achieving phenomenal life-changing results. But eventually, the logistics became too difficult. Some clients couldn't make the long commute into the city 3 times a week anymore.
London traffic is no joke.
So Tim and his clinical team gave these drop-off clients a highly simplified protocol to do at home. They told them to do just 5 minutes of intentional, deep, nasal breathing exercises combined with some basic, natural physical movement in their living rooms.
A completely free, zero technology intervention.
Right. And the clinical results.
Yeah.
The clients who committed to the 5 minutes of breathing achieved almost the exact same stabilizing health results as they did in the $50,000 hyperbaric chamber.
That is wild.
They didn't need the massive glass tube anymore. They just needed to consistently move their bodies and breathe properly. And this realization completely fractures the modern concept of biohacking. I have to be honest, I really dislike the term biohacking.
Oh, really? Why?
It sounds so aggressive. It sounds like a Silicon Valley attempt to outsmart nature, to view the human body as a flawed piece of software that needs a microchip installed to run efficiently. But the source material, and Tim's realization with the breathing exercises, entirely redefines the word. True biohacking isn't about escaping nature. It is entirely about using technology to mimic a natural environment that modern humans have violently separated themselves from.
That is the philosophical core of sustainable health optimization. The technology is just a bridge back to our evolutionary baseline. If we analyze this through the lens of the autonomic nervous system, the transition from the hyperbaric chamber to the living room floor makes perfect biological sense.
Right, the 2 branches of the nervous system.
Yes, the autonomic nervous system operates on 2 primary branches. The sympathetic branch, which is your fight or flight survival mode, and the parasympathetic branch, which is your rest and digest healing mode.
And the trigger for switching between the 2 is entirely environmental.
Exactly. Consider the average modern workday. You are sitting in a chair for 10 hours, your shoulders are hunched forward over a keyboard, collapsing your diaphragm. Because your posture is compromised, you resort to shallow, rapid breathing through your mouth. You are perpetually mildly deficient in oxygen.
Just from sitting at a desk.
Yes. And your primitive brain does not understand that you are just answering emails. It interprets that chronic, mild suffocation as a literal life-threatening threat. It assumes you are being chased by a predator.
So it panics.
It immediately locks your entire physiology into the sympathetic fight-or-flight state. Cortisol floods the system, heart rate elevates, and digestion shuts down.
Because if a tiger is chasing you, your body doesn't care about digesting your lunch or repairing your leaky gut. It only cares about sprinting.
And here is the biological absolute that so many people miss. Deep cellular healing is physically impossible while the body is in a sympathetic dominant state.
Wait, really? Impossible.
Absolutely will not happen. Your body will absolutely not dedicate precious energetic resources to fighting a chronic infection or repairing a damaged cell membrane if it believes it needs every ounce of energy to survive an imminent attack. To heal, you must convince the brain that you are safe, allowing the system to shift into parasympathetic mode.
And the hyperbaric chamber does that.
The hyperbaric chamber is just a highly expensive brute force tool to accomplish this. It forcefully oxygenates the tissue, sending a massive signal to the brain that says, look, we have an abundance of oxygen, there is no tiger, we are safe, you can drop your guard and initiate repairs.
But 5 minutes of deep, slow, intentional nasal breathing does the exact same thing. It artificially lowers the heart rate and mimics the respiration of an animal completely at rest to its natural habitat. It tricks the brain into feeling safe.
Which aligns perfectly with the philosophy shared by Dr. Ted Achacoso in the source text. He is a prominent figure in the optimization world, and he distills the entire overwhelming landscape of health down to a few fundamental directives. Eat well, sleep well, hydrate well, ground well, love well, move well, breathe well, sun well.
That's the whole list.
That is the entirety of the prescription. That is the ultimate evidence-based biohacking protocol.
But human psychology completely rejects it. We actively resist this simple solution. Why do we do that? I think it's because we desperately want the expensive painkiller, and we completely dismiss the free multivitamin.
It's the allure of the quick fix.
Right. If a slick clinic tells you that you can cure your 10-year battle with chronic fatigue by paying $30,000 for a specialized laser therapy bed, a big part of your brain believes it will work simply because the exorbitant cost creates a perception of immense value.
We equate price with efficacy.
Exactly. But if someone tells you that you can achieve the same result by waking up at sunrise, walking barefoot in the dewy grass for 20 minutes, and focusing on your breath, which is totally free, we roll our eyes. We think, my suffering is incredibly complex. Therefore, the solution must be equally complex and expensive.
It is the tragic irony driving a multi-billion-dollar wellness industry. The multivitamin, the foundational daily habits, requires personal discipline, consistency, and a fundamental shift in how you live your daily life. The painkiller just requires a credit card.
Yep.
But as Tim's journey from the hyperbaric chamber back to the living room demonstrates, the technology is merely a temporary crutch to fill the environmental gaps until you can master those natural foundations yourself.
And mastering those foundations is surprisingly rare, even among the people who dedicate their lives to this stuff. This leads us to a really eye-opening paradox detailed in the source. The reality of the professional biohacker. The people who spend millions of dollars on optimization are frequently failing at the absolute basics of biology.
The anecdote Tim shares about speaking at a conference in India is perhaps the most revealing moment regarding this paradox.
Oh man, I had to rewind the source material when I heard this part because it was so validating. So Tim is in India, standing on a stage, speaking to a room full of elite biohackers. We are talking about literal billionaires, tech founders, people who have every piece of cutting-edge experimental health technology known to man installed in their mega mansions.
Red light beds, cryotherapy chambers, continuous glucose monitors.
The works. And Tim decides to give this elite audience a very simple impromptu test. He lists 12 basic natural habits, things like eat whole foods, drink clean water, get 8 hours of sleep, get morning sunlight. He asks everyone in the room to score themselves out of 10 for each of the 12 habits.
A simple self-assessment.
Right. A perfect score, representing total mastery of the natural basics, would be 120. Remember, this is a room full of the supposed health elite. I'm assuming a room full of biohacking billionaires who have unlimited money for the best food and sleep tech in the world completely nailed this test.
The average score in the room was a shocking 58 out of 120. It was a massive collective failure.
Less than 50%. And then Tim added a brutal, brilliant caveat. He told the audience, If your score on the natural basics is under 100, I want you to subtract 2 points from your total for every daily supplement you take and every piece of health technology you own.
The implication being that the technology is actively masking their foundational incompetence.
Right. The source implies that many people in that room ended up with a final score of 0, or even plummeted into negative numbers. They were buying thousands of dollars of rare mushroom extracts and sitting in infrared saunas, but they were chronically dehydrated, sleeping 5 hours a night and staring at screens until 2 a.m.
They were completely lost in the minutia.
Exactly. Optimizing the final 1% of their biology while the foundational 99% was actively collapsing.
It begs the question, how does someone like Tim, who has access to all of these advanced clinics and technologies, actually anchor his own day in the unglamorous fundamentals?
It dictates his entire morning. But importantly, it doesn't look like the impossible routines we see on social media. It starts the absolute second he wakes up, and it starts with hydration, specifically drinking a large glass of remineralized, purified water.
He's replenishing the fluids lost through respiration during the night and providing the minerals needed to conduct the electrical signals of the nervous system.
But the most crucial and arguably the most difficult part of his morning routine is his strict rule about coffee.
The mandatory 90-minute delay.
Yes. He explicitly refuses to consume a drop of coffee for a full hour, sometimes up to 90 minutes, after waking up. Now, for 99% of the adult population, the very first instinct upon opening your eyes is to stumble like a zombie to the coffee maker and rely on caffeine to shock your system into consciousness. I'm definitely guilty of this.
Most people are.
But why is the delay so important? If I need energy immediately, why not just take the shortcut?
Because that shortcut ultimately breaks your body's natural energy production cycle. We have to look at the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Well,
When you wake up and light hits your eyes, your brain signals your adrenal glands to produce a massive natural surge of cortisol. This is known in chronobiology as the cortisol awakening response. Cortisol gets a bad reputation as the stress hormone, but in the morning, it is the crucial alertness hormone.
it boots up your brain.
Exactly. It clears the sleep inertia. This natural physiological spike takes roughly 45 to 60 minutes to reach its peak.
So the body is already naturally brewing its own internal cup of coffee.
Precisely. But if you stumble out of bed and immediately dump exogenous caffeine into your system within the first 10 minutes, you chemically blunt that natural process. You are effectively sending a signal to your adrenal glands that says, don't bother manufacturing our own energy today. I am outsourcing the job to this external substance.
So the body just gets lazy.
If you do this every day for years, your body downregulates its morning cortisol production. It stops trying. This is why caffeine addicts feel like they literally cannot function or open their eyes without their morning cup. They have chemically trained their body to stop waking itself up.
Wow.
By forcing the 90-minute delay, Tim allows his natural cortisol to hit its absolute peak, doing the heavy lifting of waking him up. Then, the eventual cup of coffee acts as a gentle, sustained bridge of energy rather than a desperate, jagged crutch. And crucially, it prevents that devastating 2 p.m. afternoon crash.
That makes so much sense. It's about letting the biology run its design program first. Once he is hydrated and the cortisol is peaking, he moves into a structured routine. He utilizes the Savers framework popularized by the book The Miracle Morning.
Silence, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing.
Right. But there's a massive contradiction in the wellness space here that Tim calls out, and it's so validating for normal people with busy lives.
What's the contradiction?
If you listen to business podcasts, you constantly hear these narratives about highly successful CEOs who have these grueling, monastic, 3-hour morning routines. They wake up at 4 a.m., meditate in a sensory deprivation tank for an hour, run a half marathon, sit in a 200-degree sauna, and write 40 pages of gratitude journaling, all before their kids wake up.
And the media narrative frames it as causality. They imply that the person is a billionaire because they do a 3-hour morning routine.
Right. But the source points out the logical fallacy there. Those executives likely grounded it out and hustled intensely, probably with terrible health habits, to build their empire and become successful in the first place. The massive, luxurious 3-hour morning routine is a result of that success, not the cause.
It's a luxury.
Yes. It's because they now have a massive staff and a nanny and a board of directors running their life that they have the free time to sit in a sauna for 2 hours on a Tuesday morning. Tim realized that the duration isn't the point. The consistency is. He condensed the entire Savers routine down to a highly assistant 1 hour, and half of that time is just dedicated to reading.
His approach to the exercise component of that routine is incredibly pragmatic, particularly for anyone who feels they simply do not have the time or energy to dedicate an hour to a gym commute.
I am obsessed with this concept. He calls it snacking on exercise.
Snacking, I love that term.
Instead of punishing himself with a grueling, exhausting 60-minute heavy lifting session that leaves him drained for the rest of the day, he scatters tiny 2-minute bursts of movement throughout his entire waking life.
How does that look in practice?
If he finishes a Zoom call
Mhm.
and has a 10-minute gap before the next one, he doesn't scroll social media. He walks into the hallway and does 25 bicep curls or a set of overhead presses. If he is traveling on an airplane and his legs feel stiff, he will literally stand up in the aisle and do 20 slow air squats. If he walks past the bathroom door in his house, he does 3 pull-ups on a bar mounted in the frame.
If we frame this exercise snacking through the lens of evolutionary biology, it is the most natural way a human can move. Consider our Paleolithic ancestors. A caveman didn't wake up, stretch, go to a designated gym cave for exactly 1 hour, lift incredibly heavy boulders until his muscles failed, drink a protein shake, and then sit completely motionless on a log for the remaining 15 hours of the day.
Which is the exact model of modern corporate fitness culture.
Yeah.
We sit frozen at a desk all day and then try to cram all our physical exertion into a frantic 45-minute spin class.
Exactly. It's an unnatural spike. Early humans engaged in constant, low-level, varied physical stimulus throughout the entirety of their day. They were walking miles to gather food, squatting to build fires, carrying water, climbing over terrain.
It's constant low-grade movement.
This frequent low-grade stimulus sends a continuous signal to the central nervous system that the body needs to remain strong, supple, and capable of adapting to the environment. It keeps the metabolic engine idling hot all day long without inducing the massive inflammatory response and severe recovery debt that a crushing high-intensity workout causes.
It's like giving your brain and muscles a steady, dripping IV of dopamine and oxygen, rather than one massive, exhausting surge. It wakes you up before a meeting without making you sweat through your suit. It is the ultimate physical application of the atomic habits philosophy, tiny, practically invisible compound actions that yield massive biological results over a decade.
And this realistic, flexible approach to health extends beautifully into how he views dietary perfection and environmental stress.
Yes, his perspective on the cheat day is crucial because the modern expectation of a perfectly optimized, perfectly clean lifestyle can actually become a disease in itself. During the interview, the host asks Tim a very pointed question about his travel habits. He asks, when you travel on an airplane, do you drink out of those cheap plastic water bottles?
A highly controversial question in that community.
Because in the hardcore biohacking community, a plastic water bottle is viewed as a toxic bomb of microplastics and endocrine-disrupting chemicals. It is strictly forbidden. And Tim's answer is so refreshing. He says, yes, if he is thirsty on a plane and needs hydration, he will drink the water out of the plastic bottle.
He doesn't obsess over it.
He doesn't panic. He doesn't call the flight attendant and demand water filtered through reverse osmosis. He just ensures that consuming microplastics is the rare exception in his life, not the baseline rule.
The physiological reasoning behind why he doesn't panic is perhaps the most important lesson in the source material. We discussed the impact of cortisol earlier. Imagine you are standing in an airport terminal, your throat is parched, but you are agonizing over the microplastics in a bottle of Dasani.
You're freaking out about the plastic.
Exactly. Your anxiety about the impure environment is causing a massive spike in your stress hormones. That chronic psychological fear response, that rigid obsession with perfect health, is actively causing more cellular inflammation and damage than the microscopic amount of plastic you might ingest from one bottle.
The stress of trying to be perfectly healthy is making you sick.
It is a recognized condition called orthorexia, an unhealthy, debilitating obsession with healthy living. If your health routine makes you so rigid that you cannot function in the normal world or enjoy a meal with your family because the vegetables aren't organic, you aren't optimized. You are just a prisoner of your own protocol.
The ultimate takeaway here is, master the foundations, snack on movement, and don't let the pursuit of perfection become the enemy of the good. However, we have to pivot here, because the source material introduces a darker, more complex reality.
The hidden leaks.
Yes, sometimes a person does master the basics. They fix their gut, they breathe perfectly, their daily habits are dialed in. By all accounts, the check engine light should be off. But Tim's immune system was still occasionally crashing. He was still suffering from lifelong irritable bowel syndrome that wouldn't fully resolve.
which means there was a leak in the system that diet and breathing physically could not reach.
And in Tim's case, that massive, hidden leak was located deep inside his skull. We're stepping into one of the most highly debated, controversial frontiers discussed in the source material, the field of biological dentistry. Let's set the stage for this because it challenges everything we know about going to the dentist. Tim eventually tracks his lingering systemic inflammation not to his stomach, not to his diet, but to his teeth, specifically to phenomena known as cavitations in root canal teeth.
It is vital to clarify the terminology here because a cavitation is not a cavity. The audience is familiar with a cavity that is bacterial decay on the hard, visible surface enamel of the tooth. A dentist drills it out and fills it. A cavitation, however, is a hidden, cavernous pocket of necrotic infection deep inside the jawbone itself.
How does that even happen?
It typically occurs in the empty space where a tooth, very commonly a wisdom tooth, has been extracted. If the periodontal ligament isn't completely removed during the extraction, the jawbone heals over the top of the hole, sealing it shut, but leaving a hollow cave inside the bone.
So it's sealed inside.
Because it is buried deep within the jaw and lacks any sensory nerve endings, it is almost always completely asymptomatic. You feel no pressure, no pain. And a traditional dentist using a standard 2D panoramic X-ray often cannot see it.
It's a hidden bunker of disease. And the other issue he identified was root canals. Now, as I understand a root canal, the dentist drills into a dead or infected tooth, removes the nerve and the pulp, fills the hollowed-out root with a rubbery material, and leaves the dead tooth structure anchored in your mouth so you can still chew with it.
That is the standard endodontic procedure. However, from the perspective of biological dentistry, both cavitations and root-canaled teeth share a catastrophic flaw. They become impenetrable safe havens for highly toxic anaerobic bacteria.
Anaerobic meaning?
Meaning these bacteria thrive in environments devoid of oxygen. Because a cavitation is sealed inside the bone and a root-canaled tooth has had its blood supply physically severed, your body's immune system cannot reach these areas. White blood cells cannot travel there to fight the infection. Systemic antibiotics cannot penetrate the dead tissue.
So they just sit there and multiply.
So these anaerobic bacteria fester in these dark, oxygen-depleted pockets for decades, mutating and producing incredibly potent neurotoxins and inflammatory cytokines, most notably interleukin-6.
Okay, stop me there. Interleukin-6. What is that, and why should I care if it's in my jaw?
Think of interleukin-6 as a chemical fire alarm. It is a protein produced by the immune system that triggers a massive inflammatory response to fight an infection. In a healthy scenario, the alarm rings, the immune system puts out the fire, and the alarm turns off.
But the fire in the tooth can't be put out.
Exactly. Because the immune system can never actually reach and kill the bacteria inside a dead tooth or a cavitation, the fire is never put out. So the interleukin-6 fire alarm just rings continuously, 24 hours a day, for years. These toxins and inflammatory markers slowly drip out of the jawbone and directly into your systemic bloodstream.
So your entire body is locked in a perpetual state of emergency, fighting a ghost war it can never win. It completely drains your cellular energy. But the most shocking part of this dental theory is how specific teeth are allegedly hardwired to specific organs in the body. Tim shares an anecdote about his surgery that sounds like science fiction.
It really does.
He is lying in the surgical chair in 2019. Finally having these massive cavitations addressed. He has 5Es in his arms, he's semi-sedated, and the biological dental team is drilling into a very specific location, the lower left number 5 tooth.
And the physiological reaction he experiences while they're working on that specific quadrant is astonishing.
As the dentist drills into that hidden pocket of infection in the jawbone, Tim's descending colon weight down in his abdomen begins to physically twitch and spasm. He can literally feel his digestive tract convulsing on the operating table.
That's a direct nervous system response.
He couldn't speak because his mouth was full of surgical instruments, but the moment the procedure was over, he looked at his biological dentist and asked, "Why was my stomach twitching the exact second you touched that tooth?" And the dentist calmly explained that, according to ancient meridian charts, the lower left number 5 tooth sits on the exact energetic meridian line that connects directly to that specific section of the large intestine.
And the ultimate clinical outcome of clearing that specific jaw infection?
After he recovered from the oral surgery, his lifelong irritable bowel syndrome, the IBS he had suffered from for years, the digestive distress that enzymes and probiotics couldn't fully cure, completely and permanently vanished.
Gone.
Completely vanished. Removing a localized infection from his jawbone instantly resolved a chronic digestive disease. How is a mechanical connection like that even biologically possible?
Well, let's go back to your highway analogy from earlier.
Okay.
A traditional dentist seems to view a bad tooth like an isolated pothole on a quiet cul-de-sac. You fill the pothole with tar, the problem is solved, and it has zero impact on the traffic in the rest of the city. But a biological dentist views a tooth as a major high-speed on-ramp leading directly to the central brain and the vital organs.
That highway analogy is anatomically perfect. The primary superhighway connecting the oral cavity to the brain is the trigeminal nerve. It is the largest, most complex, and most sensitive of all the cranial nerves. It branches directly from the teeth and jaw straight into the brainstem.
So it's a direct line.
Yes. When you have a chronic, festering, highly toxic bacterial infection at the apex of a tooth root, those bacteria and their toxic byproducts aren't just sitting politely in the jawbone. They are traveling straight up that trigeminal nerve superhighway, crossing the blood-brain barrier and causing profound neuroinflammation.
Furthermore, they enter the vascular system. Modern cardiovascular research frequently finds the exact same strains of oral bacteria responsible for periodontal disease embedded directly inside the calcified arterial plaques of patients suffering from severe heart disease.
The mouth is not separate from the body. It's the front door. But this brings up a massive tension discussed in the source material. Why is the traditional dental community so vehemently opposed to this concept? The source notes that when Gary Brecker released an interview with a biological dentist discussing these very concepts, the episode was heavily attacked, reported, and nearly censored by traditional dental associations. They aggressively insist there is no systemic danger to root canals.
The source approaches this professional pushback with a surprising amount of empathy, which I think is crucial. It is not that traditional endodontists and dentists are malicious or intentionally trying to harbor infections in their patients. It is fundamentally a matter of profound psychological self-preservation.
Ego protection.
Imagine you are a highly trained, deeply ethical practitioner. You have spent 30 years of your career diligently performing root canals and placing mercury amalgam fillings, genuinely believing you are relieving pain and saving teeth. If a new scientific paradigm emerges that credibly suggests those exact procedures have been inadvertently trapping toxic necrotic infections and causing systemic harm to the very patients you swore to protect,
That is a devastating psychological blow.
it induces massive cognitive dissonance. The human ego cannot easily accept a reality that implies a lifetime of well-intentioned work was actually harmful. Therefore, the natural protective subconscious bias is to aggressively reject the new information, attack the messenger, and cling tightly to the traditional training.
Wow. It's hard to unlearn something when your entire professional identity and livelihood are tethered to it. That makes perfect sense. But once Tim navigated that controversy and finally cleared those hidden jaw infections, the systemic burden was lifted. However, he didn't just stop at baseline health. The source material outlines some advanced, honestly wild biohacks he utilized to scrub any lingering deep tissue inflammation from his system. We have to talk about methylene blue.
Methylene blue is one of the most fascinating and bizarre compounds in the optimization toolkit, with a truly strange historical origin.
Strange barely covers it. It was originally synthesized in a laboratory in the late 1800s as a literal fabric dye. It was used by the textile industry to dye cotton blue. But early medical researchers eventually noticed it had profound biological properties. It was the first fully synthetic medicine ever used, originally to treat malaria.
And it still has emergency medical applications today.
Yeah, in modern traditional medicine, it is stocked in emergency rooms as an FDA-approved antidote for carbon monoxide poisoning and cyanide poisoning. But in the biohacking world, it is being utilized to fundamentally supercharge the mitochondria.
The mechanism of action is remarkable. Methylene blue acts as an artificial electron donor within the mitochondrial electron transport chain.
Okay, you're losing me again. Electron transport chain. I need an analogy.
Let's use the car analogy again. Imagine the mitochondria, the power plants inside your cells, as the car's engine. When the engine is damaged by toxins, age, or inflammation, the battery dies. The cell cannot produce ATP, which is the chemical energy currency of the body. The electron transport chain is the internal wiring that charges that battery.
And where does the methylene blue come in?
Methylene blue acts essentially like a pair of chemical jumper cables. When you introduce it into the system, it physically bypasses the damaged, broken parts of the cellular machinery and directly donates electrons to the system, artificially forcing the mitochondria to produce massive amounts of ATP energy.
It jumpstarts the dead engine.
And because it is highly lipophilic, it easily crosses the blood-brain barrier. This is why users report profound, almost immediate mental clarity and a significant lifting of brain fog and depressive symptoms, particularly when they pair it with red light therapy, which further catalyzes the reaction.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
But Tim didn't just drink it. Because he had suffered from lingering stubborn prostate issues dating all the way back to his years of severe urinary tract infections, he decided to utilize methylene blue in a way that sounds absolutely medieval.
The Florida Clinic Protocol.
He flew to a specialized clinic in Sarasota, Florida. He lay on a table, and a doctor took a 5-inch needle, guided it via ultrasound through his bladder, and injected a potent cocktail of methylene blue, medical ozone gas, and antibiotics directly into his prostate gland.
It sounds horrifying to the layman.
It sounds like a torture device. But when you understand the anatomy, the logic is flawless. The prostate gland is heavily encapsulated.
Think of it like a thick orange peel.
Yes. The barrier is so thick that oral systemic antibiotics circulating in the bloodstream often cannot penetrate deep enough into the core of the gland to eradicate a deeply embedded infection. This is why men suffer from agonizing chronic prostatitis for decades. The drugs just bounce off the peel.
But the direct injection changes that.
By using a needle to bypass the barrier and deliver the payload directly into the center of the infection, the impact is immediate. The ozone gas instantly oxidizes and destroys the cell walls of the anaerobic bacteria, the antibiotics clean up the residual pathogens, and the methylene blue massively reduces the localized tissue inflammation. Tim reported that despite how awful it sounds, his pain level during the procedure was only a 2 out of 10.
That's surprisingly low.
And within 48 hours, his urinary flow and prostate pain were dramatically, permanently improved. It was a night and day transformation.
And alongside these extreme chemical interventions, he also engaged in physical, structural modifications to ensure his body was continuously receiving that vital oxygen we discussed earlier. He underwent a procedure known as a balloon sinuplasty.
Right. Another one that sounds intense but addresses a critical mechanical bottleneck. If you can't breathe through your nose because your sinus passages are physically too narrow or collapsed, no amount of breathing exercises will help.
You're mechanically restricted.
So an ENT doctor inserts a tiny deflated balloon up into the sinus cavities and rapidly inflates it, physically cracking, stretching, and widening the cartilage plates to permanently open the airway. Tim then combined this structural widening with a daily practice of mouth taping at night.
He literally tapes his mouth shut.
He literally places a specialized piece of adhesive tape over his lips before going to sleep, physically forcing his body to rely 100% on nasal breathing for 8 continuous hours.
The downstream physiological benefits of forcing nasal breathing cannot be overstated. When you breathe through your nasal passages, the friction of the air passing over the turbinates triggers the release of nitric oxide.
What does that do?
Nitric oxide is a potent vasodilator. It relaxes and expands your blood vessels, significantly lowering systemic blood pressure and massively improving heart rate variability, or HRV, which is the primary biometric indicator of how resilient your nervous system is to stress.
It changes everything.
But what is truly visually remarkable about Tim's journey is the physical structural change. By consistently breathing through his nose and maintaining proper tongue posture, keeping the tongue firmly pressed against the roof of the mouth, Tim physically altered his adult facial bone structure over the course of 3 years.
You can change your bones as an adult.
His cheekbones became visibly more prominent, his jawline widened, and his airway expanded. The human skeleton is not static. It is constantly remodeling itself based on the mechanical forces applied to it.
Which brings us to a massive philosophical pivot. We have spent this entire deep dive discussing extreme self-optimization. We've talked about injecting fabric dye into organs, taking hundreds of enzymes, taping mouths shut, extracting platinum coils, and obsessively tracking sleep scores. What is the actual point of all this?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why dedicate so much time and money to this pursuit? Because if you are not incredibly careful, biohacking just devolves into a highly narcissistic, selfish, hypochondriac obsession with your own reflection.
That is the greatest danger of the optimization movement, and it is a trap Tim actively guards against by rigorously curating what he feeds his mind, not just his cellular biology.
Right.
He is an avid reader, consuming roughly a book a week, but one of the texts he returns to constantly is not a medical textbook or a diet manifesto. It is a book on media manipulation written by Ryan Holiday titled "Trust Me, I'm Lying."
This detail fascinated me.
Yeah.
Why would the United Kingdom's leading health optimization expert dedicate his time to studying a book about how sleazy marketers manipulate the news cycle?
Because the health and wellness industry is completely and utterly dominated by media narratives. Tim understands that the modern digital media model is fundamentally broken. Media outlets, newspapers, and health blogs are no longer financially incentivized to produce high-quality, nuanced, deeply researched, factual medical content.
What are they incentivized by?
They are incentivized by one single metric: impressions, clicks.
Exactly. They need human eyes on the web page to justify their advertising rates. And the fastest, most efficient way to generate 1 million clicks isn't to publish a balanced 40-page peer-reviewed study on the benefits of dietary fiber.
No one reads that.
It is to publish a highly controversial, terrifying clickbait headline like, "Why Eating Apples Will Destroy Your Brain by Age 40." Marketers understand this psychology perfectly. Ryan Holiday's book exposes how PR firms will intentionally leak controversial, wildly out of context, or flat-out false health information to low-level, unverified blogs.
And then it spreads.
They do this knowing that larger, more reputable media outlets will eventually scoop the story up in a desperate, blind rush for viral traffic. They design the information specifically to educate the reader, to trigger a fear response or righteous anger, because angry and terrified people share links.
And this is exactly why it matters for anyone listening to this deep dive. Optimizing your biology is completely useless if you are simultaneously feeding your consciousness a diet of toxic, manipulative, fear-mongering information.
That's a great point.
It is the equivalent of spending $3 million to engineer a flawless Formula One Ferrari engine, filling it with premium aviation fuel, meticulously tuning the suspension,
And then driving it directly into a toxic, muddy, inescapable swamp. The machine itself is perfect, but the environment you are forcing it to navigate completely destroys the experience of driving.
Exactly. Understanding the mechanics of media manipulation provides you with a psychological filter. It allows you to scroll through the overwhelming sea of daily contradictory health headlines without your cortisol spiking every time an article falsely claims that walking barefoot is going to give you a flesh-eating parasite.
This realization about the mind-body connection raises the ultimate question, which the host of the source material asks Tim right at the culmination of their hours-long conversation. After a decade of immense struggle, after curing the bed-bound fatigue, mapping the mercury toxicity, rebuilding the gut, and undoing the surgeries, what does it actually mean to be an ultimate human?
And Tim's reaction to that question is so telling. He is genuinely stumped for a minute. He sits in complete silence, searching for the words.
Because he realizes the answer isn't a biometric data point. It's not about having a perfect 99 sleep score on your Oura ring. It's not about possessing the most structurally resilient mitochondria, or having the widest nasal passages, or owning the most expensive hyperbaric chamber in London.
The conclusion he finally arrives at is deeply profound, and it completely subverts the biohacking ethos. He states that being an ultimate human is simply about having the capacity to be an amazing human being to other people.
Yes, that is the entire point of the spear. It is about generating enough physical and mental energy to afford the luxury of being kind. Tim notes that if we look back at our ancient tribal origins, the ultimate indicator of a successful, optimized life was how you treated your community. Were you useful to the tribe? Were you generous with your resources? Were you a net positive to the people standing directly in front of you?
All the biohacking we've discussed, the systemic enzymes, the strict hydration protocols, the removal of heavy metals, the early morning sunlight, these are merely biological prerequisites.
Right, because if you haven't slept, if your gut is inflamed, if your cells are starving, what happens to your personality? You are snappy. You are highly reactive. You yell at your spouse over nothing. You have zero patience for your kids, and you are unhelpful and bitter toward your colleagues.
You cannot be a good human if your biology is in a state of crisis. It is an evolutionary impossibility. The human organism will always prioritize its own immediate survival over empathy for others.
When your body is inflamed, exhausted, and silently fighting a war against toxicity, your worldview inherently shrinks to the exact size of your own physical pain. You have absolutely nothing left in the energetic tank to give to anyone else.
Tim's harrowing journey ultimately proved that you optimize the biology solely so that the psychology has the freedom to be kind. You painstakingly fix the machine so that the operator inside can be a force for good in the world.
Wow. Let's just take a breath and recap the incredible arc we have been on today. We started with a chronically ill, desperately overworked executive who was urinating 50 times a day, staring at a doctor who essentially told him his suffering was a mystery.
We followed him as he covered a wall in Post-it notes to map out a broken methylation cycle and mercury-bound cells.
We watched him rebuild a completely scorched earth gut microbiome using potassium, proteolytic enzymes, and ox bile. We explored how he utilized the pressurized environment of hyperbaric oxygen as a shortcut to healing, before realizing that the most powerful interventions are just mimicking nature, breathing through the nose, seeking the sun, and walking on the earth.
We learned about the dangers of the 120-point billionaire checklist, the genius of exercise snacking, and the reality of the morning cortisol spike.
We went deep down the rabbit hole of biological dentistry, connecting a twitching colon directly to an anaerobic infection on a meridian highway. And finally, we realized that all of this effort, every drop of methylene blue, every piece of mouth tape, and every delayed cup of coffee is just to give us the surplus energy required to be good to each other.
It is a phenomenal, sweeping synthesis of root cause medicine, evolutionary biology, and profound personal accountability. But before we sign off, I want to leave the listener with a final thought to mull over something that extends far beyond Tim Gray's personal medical chart.
I am all ears. What is the thought?
Throughout this entire deep dive, we have discussed biohacking as a necessary, almost defensive tool to fix the human organism so it can survive the modern world. We have to buy specialized amber-tinted glasses to block artificial blue light from our screens. We have to purchase expensive reverse osmosis filters to strip the chemical toxins from our municipal tap water.
Right, all defensive measure.
We have to consciously schedule and track 20 minutes of time to simply step our bare feet onto the earth. We are expending vast, unprecedented amounts of time, mental energy, and financial resources just to drag ourselves back to a baseline of natural biological functioning.
Okay.
So the provocative thought I want to leave everyone with is this. Are we hacking the wrong side of the equation? If our modern environment, our ultra-processed food supply, our isolating sedentary corporate structures, our aggressively agitating click-driven media cycle forces us into a perpetual state of biological crisis, should we stop trying to hack the human body to endure it?
And do what instead?
Should we instead start using that energy to completely redesign the societal habitats we live in?
Oh, man. That is powerful. It really brings us full circle right back to the beginning. We aren't just looking at a broken diagnostic machine. We are looking at a world that is actively poisoning the well. If the fish in the aquarium is sick, you don't inject the fish with methylene blue and put it in a hyperbaric chamber. You clean the tank. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary biology of resilience. We hope this conversation gave you the conceptual tools to start opening your own herd, checking your own wires, and asking better questions. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning the consensus, and keep taking care of yourselves.